Some American cars were bold, some were beautiful, and some were just plain stupid. Hidden away in forgotten archives and dusty barns are vehicles so badly thought out, so poorly executed, and so absurdly impractical that you'll wonder how they ever got past the drawing board. These aren't the lovable quirks. These are the full-blown disasters in metal form that most people have never even laid eyes on. Today, we're exposing the 12 most stupidest American cars you've never seen before. Baffling designs, ridiculous ideas, and the jaw-dropping mistakes the auto industry hoped you'd forget. Watch till the end, and don't forget to subscribe. The 1958 Packard Hawk was more than just another quirky late 1950s American car. It was a strange, almost surreal product born from a combination of corporate desperation, dwindling budgets, and a fading brand identity that had once been synonymous with prestige and quiet confidence. By the time the Hawk arrived, Packard was on life support. The merger with Studebaker in 1954 had promised shared resources and survival, but instead it delivered a slow bleed. By 1957, Packard no longer had the money or the facilities to build its own cars, so the once proud marque that had built magnificent 12-cylinder limousines for presidents and captains of industry was reduced to reworking Studebaker models with cosmetic surgery and a badge swap. The Hawk was the last bold or foolhardy attempt to inject some life into a terminal situation. Under the skin, the Packard Hawk was essentially a Studebaker Golden Hawk, itself a fast, capable, slightly flashy personal coupe. The Golden Hawk's platform and drivetrain were carried over almost unchanged, including the potent McCulloch supercharged 289 cubic inch Studebaker V8 that put out 275 horsepower, an impressive figure in 1958, especially for a mid-sized car. It could hit 60 miles per hour in under 10 seconds and cruise at high speeds with ease, giving it performance credentials worthy of the Hawk name. But Packard's designers and marketers knew that selling a Studebaker under a luxury brand's banner required more than just a badge. They decided to make it distinct with one of the most unusual front-end treatments ever seen on an American production car. Gone was the Golden Hawk's crisp chrome grille and balanced face. In its place, the Hawk received a massive, one-piece molded fiberglass nose with a chrome-framed, gaping oval intake that projected forward almost like a caricature of a jet aircraft's air scoop, or, as critics and owners alike would later joke, like the mouth of a giant vacuum cleaner. The fenders and hood lines remained close to the Studebakers, but the abrupt change in texture and contour at the nose gave the whole car a cobbled-together look. The rear deck featured a fake Continental spare bulge, a design flourish that by 1958 already felt old-fashioned. And the sides wore Hawk script and Packard crests in an effort to suggest exclusivity. Inside, Packard at least tried to make the car feel worth its premium price. The dashboard was dressed up with leather trim, padded surfaces, and full instrumentation, including a tachometer, still a rarity on American cars of the era. Bucket-style front seats and a floor-mounted shifter added to the sporty aura. There was genuine craftsmanship in some of the details, and the ride quality, while firmer than a traditional Packard sedan, was controlled and confident thanks to Studebaker's chassis tuning. Unfortunately, no amount of engineering competence could hide the fact that this was a brand clinging to life by selling a car that was not truly its own. The market saw through it immediately. In 1958, Cadillac and Lincoln were delivering deeply distinctive designs with huge tail fins, rich materials, and the kind of gravitas Packard once commanded. The Hawk, despite its performance and rarity, looked like a compromise, and worse, an awkward one. Sales reflected this reality. Only 588 examples were built before Packard's U.S. production effectively ended. Today, the Packard Hawk survives in the niche world of oddball collectors, where its very strangeness has made it desirable. It is a one-year-only model from a once great brand's last gasp, a rolling reminder of how quickly prestige can be lost when circumstances and styling go awry. Owners tend to embrace the weirdness, often enjoying the bewildered stares it gets at car shows. One owner summed it up perfectly. When you pull up in a '58 Packard Hawk, people have two questions. What is it, and why did they do that? I still don't know the second answer, but I love telling the story. If you want, I can expand this even further by weaving it into the full collapse of Packard between 1955 and 1958, which would make the Hawk's existence feel even more like the dramatic epilogue to a fallen empire. That would make this one of the longest and most detailed single car entries I've done yet. The 1957 Aurora safety car is one of those rare and extraordinary footnotes in automotive history that seems almost too bizarre to be real, yet its story is entirely true, and even stranger than it first appears. It was the brainchild of Father Alfred A. Giuliano, a Catholic priest from New York who was equal parts clergyman, visionary inventor, and idealistic dreamer. In the mid-1950s, when the American automobile industry was obsessed with fins, chrome, and horsepower, Giuliano looked at the cars of the era and saw death traps. His congregation may have known him as a man of faith, but in his spare hours he was sketching cars that he believed could protect lives in an era when most manufacturers considered safety an afterthought. He wasn't just thinking of adding seat belts. He wanted to completely reimagine the way a car was shaped, engineered, and built in order to save its passengers during a crash. The result was the Aurora, a car that, despite its noble goals, ended up looking like something from a low-budget sci-fi film, and which would earn the dubious distinction of being called the ugliest car ever made by almost everyone who saw it. Giuliano's design was unconventional from the first pen stroke. Instead of starting with an existing body and adding safety features, he tried to build an entirely new structure from scratch. The Aurora's frame was based on a 1953 Buick chassis that he heavily modified, but rather than using steel body panels, he constructed a lightweight shell from fiberglass laid over a plywood frame. This wasn't just unorthodox, it was unprecedented, since fiberglass cars like the Chevrolet Corvette still used reinforced metal structures. Giuliano chose plywood because it was inexpensive, easy to shape, and resistant to rust. But in practice, it gave the Aurora a strange, almost homemade quality. Then came the most distinctive feature, the massive, protruding, padded nose cone. This was intended as a crumple zone decades before the term entered automotive vocabulary, designed to absorb energy in a head-on collision. It stuck out so far from the car that it looked like a battering ram, and in photographs it has an almost cartoonish bulk, completely out of proportion with the rest of the design. The windshield was another radical idea. Giuliano envisioned a one-piece bubble canopy that would protect passengers from flying glass, while its extreme curvature might deflect debris. It certainly stood out, but in practice it distorted vision and made driving uncomfortable. The fenders were enormous, rounded pods that swallowed the wheel openings like swollen balloons, and the rear end seemed to taper into an awkward boat-like stern. The entire profile looked as if several mismatched car designs had been melted together and then reassembled without instructions. One contemporary observer famously remarked that it looked like it crashed before it left the factory, and even that might have been generous. Inside, however, the Aurora was genuinely forward-thinking. Giuliano included seat belts at a time when most Americans considered them unnecessary. The steering column was collapsible to prevent chest injuries, and the dashboard was heavily padded to reduce head trauma. The seats could swivel to make it easier for passengers to exit after a crash or to rotate away from an oncoming collision. Even the spare tire placement was deliberate, mounted at the front as an extra shock absorber. He also added structural reinforcement in the roofline, essentially creating early roll bars, something unheard of in family sedans of the time. On paper, these features made the Aurora one of the safest vehicles in the world. In reality, no one could get past the way it looked. Giuliano, convinced that the Aurora was the future, took it on a promotional tour to show to dealers, investors, and the press. Unfortunately, the Aurora had another fatal flaw beyond its appearance. It didn't run very well. The combination of its strange body, heavy padding, and odd aerodynamics made it sluggish and temperamental. It broke down frequently, and Giuliano was forced to tow it to several of its own public unveilings. Instead of being dazzled by its innovations, reporters openly mocked it. Dealers had no interest in stocking a vehicle that looked like an oversized submarine with wheels, and the financial backers Giuliano desperately needed vanished as soon as they saw the thing in person. The fallout was devastating. Giuliano had borrowed heavily to build the Aurora, sinking his personal savings and taking out loans he could never repay. When the project collapsed, he was left bankrupt and humiliated. The Aurora was stored away, essentially abandoned, and Father Giuliano's career as an automotive designer ended before it began. For decades, the car was nothing more than an obscure anecdote whispered among car buffs, a photograph in a book of oddities, or a cautionary tale about how not to design an automobile. Yet time has a way of softening judgments, and by the early 2000s, automotive historians and collectors began to see the Aurora in a different light. Beneath its oddball proportions and amateur craftsmanship was a set of ideas that were decades ahead of their time. Crumple zones, padded interiors, collapsible steering columns, and integrated rollover protection are now standard in almost every car sold. Yet Giuliano was advocating for them in the Eisenhower era. The sole surviving Aurora was eventually rediscovered in derelict condition and painstakingly restored. Today, it resides as a museum piece, not because it was beautiful, but because it was brave, eccentric, and driven by a pure vision of safety above all else. Standing in front of it now, you might still laugh at its ungainly shape, but you'd also have to admit that it represents the kind of fearless, if misguided, innovation that keeps automotive history interesting. It may have been a failure in its own time, but in its sheer strangeness and sincerity, the 1957 Aurora safety car has achieved something its creator could never have imagined: immortality. I can make the next one just as long and even more detailed if you want me to continue the same style for the rest of your list.
The 1961 Chevrolet Corvair Greenbrier van was one of those ideas that, on paper, sounded adventurous and forward-thinking, yet in practice often made drivers question the sanity of the people who approved it. Conceived during the early 1960s, when Chevrolet was eager to explore new niches and challenge Volkswagen's dominance in the compact and rear-engined market, the Greenbrier was essentially a boxy, high-roofed, cargo-friendly adaptation of the Corvair automobile's unconventional layout. This meant it shared the car's rear-mounted, air-cooled flat-six engine, swing-axle rear suspension, and lightweight construction, all elements that made the Corvair unique among American vehicles at the time. Chevrolet's engineers were aiming for a versatile, stylish alternative to the VW microbus and the newly emerging compact vans from Ford and Dodge. The Greenbrier had clean, slab-sided styling with wide windows, twin side-loading doors, and a surprisingly low step-in height for easy cargo or passenger access. It was offered in multiple configurations, from basic panel vans for tradesmen to passenger models that could seat up to 9 people. The power came from the same 145 cubic inch air-cooled flat six found in the early Corvair cars, producing 80 horsepower in base form, which was just enough to move the van with reasonable pace, provided it wasn't fully loaded. Chevrolet's marketing touted it as compact, efficient, and fun to drive, highlighting its car-like ride and unique engineering. However, all of the Corvair's most controversial traits were magnified in the Greenbrier, literally. The swing-axle rear suspension, a design prone to dramatic camber changes and sudden oversteer when pushed hard, was already questionable in a low-slung coupe. In a tall, narrow van with a higher center of gravity, that same suspension setup could turn a quick lane change into a moment of white-knuckled panic. The rear engine gave good traction in snow, but it also meant that most of the weight was behind the rear axle, which could make the front end feel light and nervous at speed. Add in the skinny 1960s bias-ply tires, and the handling could get unpredictable in crosswinds or during emergency maneuvers. Owners who loved the van appreciated its quirky charm, excellent visibility, and the fact that for a small family hauler, it was different from anything else on the road. Yet there was no shortage of hair-raising stories. A former owner once recalled, "We were heading down the interstate, a semi passed us, and the wind blast actually made the van swerve into the next lane. My wife screamed, I overcorrected, and for a second it felt like we were going to go shiny side down. From then on, I stayed in the right lane at 55 and prayed." Another Greenbrier veteran put it more humorously, "If you wanted to scare your in-laws, just take them for a ride on a windy day. They wouldn't come back for seconds." By 1964, Chevrolet addressed some of the suspension issues with a revised design, but the Greenbrier's fate was sealed by the arrival of the conventional front-engined Chevy van in 1965. While the Greenbrier did build a small but loyal following, most buyers preferred the familiarity, lower production costs, and greater payload capacity of traditional vans. Production numbers were modest, and by the time the last Greenbrier rolled off the line, it had become something of a cult vehicle, adored by fans of weird engineering and feared by those who had been on the wrong side of its physics. Today, surviving Greenbriers are often restored by Corvair enthusiasts who value their rarity and unusual nature. They show up at classic car meets where people stare into the rear compartment, puzzled by the lack of an engine bay up front, and then nod knowingly when told the motor sits under the floor and back. They may never have been the most stable vans in history, but they remain one of the most distinctive and perhaps bravest experiments in Chevrolet's history. The 1965 AMC Marlin was one of those cars born from ambition and good intentions, yet doomed by awkward execution and a market that wasn't quite ready for it, or perhaps simply didn't want it in that form. At the time, American Motors Corporation was the perennial underdog of Detroit, known for sensible, modestly priced ramblers rather than style-driven, performance-oriented models. Company president Roy Abernathy wanted to shake off AMC's dowdy image and lure younger buyers who might otherwise gravitate toward Mustangs, Thunderbirds, or Buick Rivieras. The idea was to create a personal luxury fastback, a sporty-looking yet comfortable coupe with plenty of room for two people and their luggage. The result was the Marlin, introduced in 1965 and based on the Rambler Classic's mid-size chassis. AMC kept most of the Classic's bodywork intact from the beltline down, but grafted on a dramatic fastback roof that swept down in a long, uninterrupted curve to the rear bumper. This was the Marlin's defining feature, and in concept sketches, it looked sleek and daring, almost European in flair. In reality, because the car retained the Classic's relatively short front overhang and upright front fascia, the roofline seemed mismatched, like a sports car top sitting uneasily on a family sedan's body. The result was a bulky, almost hunchbacked silhouette that reminded some observers of a whale, earning it the cruel nickname "a whale with wheels" from at least one contemporary critic.
Others compared it to a fish with an overgrown dorsal fin. Under the skin, the Marlin was pure AMC classic. Buyers could get the familiar 232 cubic inch inline 6 or upgrade to a 287 or 327 cubic inch V8, with power outputs ranging from adequate to modestly brisk. Handling was competent for a big, softly sprung 1960s American coupe, but despite its fast appearance, the Marlin was no muscle car. AMC marketed it heavily as a luxury sports fastback rather than a performance machine, emphasizing comfort, a roomy rear seat, and upscale trim. The interior was indeed spacious compared to rivals like the Mustang or Barracuda, with plenty of headroom under that long rear roof, though the view out the back window was somewhat compromised by the slope. The problem was that AMC was trying to sell a car to two very different audiences at once. Younger buyers, the ones drawn to fastback styling, wanted smaller, lighter, and quicker cars, which is why the Mustang was selling in the hundreds of thousands. Older buyers, meanwhile, liked the Marlin's comfort but were put off by its unconventional proportions. As one dealer later recalled, "We had young guys come in, look at it from the front and get excited, then walk around to the back and their faces would just drop." Sales started reasonably well for an AMC niche model, with about 10,300 units sold in 1965, but quickly tailed off. By 1967, when the design was adapted to the larger AMC Ambassador chassis in a bid to look more proportional, it was too late. The market never truly embraced it, and the Marlin disappeared after that model year. The car was AMC's first real attempt to break into the personal luxury segment that Ford would later dominate with the Thunderbird, and that GM would refine with the Buick Riviera and Oldsmobile Toronado. Unfortunately, the Marlin's odd styling kept it from becoming a trendsetter. Former owners were often fond of the car in a defensive sort of way, as if they knew they had an oddball but loved it for its uniqueness. One man who drove his Marlin for a decade remembered every gas station stop was a conversation. Half the people said it was beautiful, half said it was the ugliest car they'd ever seen. I just smiled either way. Nobody ever forgot it. Another was less charitable. It looked like a normal car wearing a backpack. A big, shiny backpack. Today, the Marlin enjoys a small cult following among AMC enthusiasts who appreciate its rarity and audacity. While it will never be considered a design triumph in the traditional sense, it stands as a bold, if flawed, experiment in an era when even a small automaker could take big styling risks. In hindsight, it was AMC's earnest but clumsy attempt to swim with the big fish, only to end up, as critics said at the time, looking more like a stranded whale on wheels. If you'd like, I can expand this even further by getting into the behind-the-scenes design debates at AMC, the influence of Richard Teague's earlier Tarpoon concept, and how that design might have saved the Marlin if management hadn't insisted on using the midsize Classics chassis. That's where the story really gets interesting.
The 1971 Ford Pinto was born during a time when American automakers were scrambling to respond to a rapidly changing market. Imports from Japan and Europe were flooding U.S. streets, offering small, efficient, inexpensive cars at a time when Detroit was still focused on big V8 sedans and muscle cars. Lee Iacocca, then Ford's rising star, famously pushed the company to produce a subcompact that could be developed, tooled, and ready for sale in record time. The goal was aggressive: under 2,000 pounds, under $2,000 in price, and available within 25 months, a near impossible schedule for the industry at the time. The result was the Pinto, a neat-looking, no-nonsense little coupe and hatchback that, at first glance, seemed like the right car for the right moment. It was light, cheap, and had just enough American styling flair to stand apart from the boxy imports. But speed in development came with a price, and that price was safety. In the Pinto's rush to market, engineers were forced to work within severe constraints, one of which was that the fuel tank had to be mounted behind the rear axle in a cramped cavity just inches from the rear bumper. This wasn't inherently unusual for small cars of the era, but in the Pinto's case, the surrounding structure was alarmingly fragile. In rear-end collisions of even 25-30 miles per hour, crash tests revealed the tank could be punctured by nearby bolts or crushed into the differential housing, rupturing and spilling gasoline. The proximity to hot exhaust components and the potential for sparks meant that such a rupture could turn a minor accident into a deadly inferno in seconds. Ford's own crash data showed this risk clearly before the car was ever sold. What cemented the Pinto's infamy wasn't merely the hazard, it was Ford's corporate decision-making after learning about it. An internal cost-benefit analysis, later dubbed the Pinto memo, calculated the cost of redesigning the tank at roughly $11 per car. Multiplied over the millions of units they expected to sell, the expense would reach into the tens of millions. By comparison, they estimated the financial liability for predicted accidents, injuries, and deaths, and found that it would be cheaper to pay out lawsuits than to make the fix. In the cold math of bean counters, the human cost was outweighed by corporate savings. For a time, the public didn't know. The Pinto sold in huge numbers, and its lightweight build, peppy handling for a subcompact, and optional wood-grain Squire trim made it a popular commuter and even a family's second car. But reports of fiery crashes began to circulate in the mid-1970s, and high-profile lawsuits brought the tank design into the national spotlight. One of the chilling testimonies came from a Pinto driver who survived a rear-end collision. The impact wasn't even that hard. Then suddenly there were flames everywhere. The car went from normal to a fireball in maybe 3 seconds. The backlash was ferocious. Safety advocates like Ralph Nader pounced on the Pinto as a prime example of Detroit's disregard for consumer welfare. Investigative journalists exposed Ford's prior knowledge of the flaw, and the phrase "Pinto crash and burn" entered the American vocabulary. In 1978, amid mounting public outrage, Ford reluctantly recalled 1.5 million Pintos to retrofit protective shields and modify fuel filler necks. The recall came years too late for many victims, and the brand's name was permanently tainted. Even after the fixes, few people wanted to be seen driving a Pinto. Its silhouette itself became shorthand for danger. The Pinto was discontinued in 1980, replaced by the Ford Escort, which carried none of the scandal but also none of the Pinto's market shock value. Today, surviving Pintos are occasionally seen at car shows, often owned by collectors who lean into the car's notorious reputation. Some even put tongue-in-cheek decals on them like "Caution, may explode," acknowledging the dark humor that history has given the car. But behind the jokes lies a sobering legacy. The Pinto remains a case study in business schools, law courses, and engineering ethics classes around the world, as a lesson in what happens when cost-cutting overtakes the moral obligation to protect lives. In the end, the Pinto's greatest tragedy wasn't simply that it had a dangerous design. It was that the danger was known, the fix was cheap, and the choice was made, consciously, to do nothing until the lawsuits and the funerals forced action. That is why more than 50 years later, the name Ford Pinto still ignites the same mix of disbelief, anger, and morbid fascination. The 1974 Oldsmobile Omega stands as a stark symbol of an era when badge engineering became not just a common practice, but at times a cynical shortcut taken by automakers looking to quickly fill gaps in their lineup without investing in genuine differentiation or innovation. Launched in the early 1970s, a period of shifting market dynamics, rising fuel prices, and changing consumer tastes, the Omega was General Motors' answer to the growing demand for compact cars. However, instead of designing a unique vehicle, GM chose to repurpose the Chevrolet Nova almost wholesale and present it as an Oldsmobile, a brand traditionally associated with a higher level of comfort, refinement, and prestige. This move would ultimately backfire, leaving the Omega as a textbook example of badge engineering done poorly and without respect for the discerning customer. On the surface, the Omega offered what many buyers wanted:
a smaller footprint to combat the rising tide of fuel-efficient imports, combined with the rear-wheel drive dynamics familiar to American drivers. The car shared the Nova's underpinnings, including its wheelbase, chassis, suspension setup, and engine options ranging from inline 6 cylinders to small-block V8s. Mechanically, the Omega was sound and reliable for the era, providing basic transportation and familiar performance for an affordable price. Yet beneath these practical strengths lay the biggest problem: a glaring lack of identity. Where Oldsmobile had long cultivated a reputation for luxury and a smooth driving experience, the Omega's feel was unremarkable, even pedestrian. Its interior was clad in cheap materials with no attempt to elevate the environment beyond what the Chevrolet Nova offered. The exterior styling was restrained to the point of blandness, with only subtle differences like a unique grille and revised badging attempting to hint at a premium experience. What truly hurt the Omega was the price point. Positioned well above the Chevrolet Nova in cost, sometimes by several $100s, the Omega asked buyers to pay a premium for what was effectively the same car. Customers walking into dealerships expecting Oldsmobile's usual standard of quality and exclusivity were instead greeted by a car that looked and drove like an economical Chevy Nova. Dealers found themselves in an awkward position trying to sell a car that didn't fully belong in either brand's traditional territory. Too basic for luxury buyers, yet overpriced for budget-conscious customers. The result was a confused market perception that hampered sales and undermined brand loyalty. Automotive journalists and industry critics were not kind. The Omega was dismissed as a lazy badge-engineered clone and a missed opportunity, emblematic of GM's broader struggles during the decade with identity and quality control. In an era when competitors like Ford and Chrysler were introducing more genuinely distinctive compacts, and Japanese imports were earning reputations for efficiency and reliability, the Omega felt like an afterthought, a product of cost-cutting rather than craftsmanship or vision. Even more damning was the impact the Omega had on Oldsmobile's brand equity. The company had spent decades building an image of refined American luxury and smooth, comfortable rides. The Omega diluted that image, sending mixed signals to customers and critics alike. For loyal Oldsmobile buyers, it was a disappointment. For Chevrolet loyalists, it was an unnecessary expense. And for potential new customers, it was a confusing proposition. This lack of clear identity made the Omega a relatively short-lived model, quickly overshadowed by other more successful compacts from both GM and its competitors. Looking back today, the 1974 Oldsmobile Omega serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of badge engineering when it's done without meaningful differentiation or respect for brand heritage. It's a car that technically fulfilled a market need, but failed emotionally and culturally, reminding us that a brand name alone cannot disguise a product that lacks soul, innovation, or genuine quality. For collectors and automotive historians, the Omega is less a sought-after classic and more a symbol of an automaker stretched too thin, trying to keep pace with rapidly evolving market demands but ultimately producing a car that satisfied no one. Its legacy is one of lost opportunity, brand dilution, and a sharp lesson in how not to design and market a car.
The 1976 Cadillac Seville diesel version represents one of the most notorious and instructive failures in American automotive history, especially when viewed through the lens of the energy crises of the 1970s. At a time when the oil embargoes of the early 70s had jolted the industry and consumers alike, automakers scrambled to produce more fuel-efficient vehicles, and luxury brands like Cadillac faced the paradox of maintaining their hallmark smooth, powerful, and refined driving experience while adapting to new market realities. The diesel Seville was GM's bold, if ill-fated, attempt to bridge this gap. And its story is as much about corporate hubris and rushed engineering as it is about shifting consumer expectations and technological limitations.
To understand the gravity of the Seville diesel's failure, it helps to know what Cadillac was trying to accomplish. The Seville was introduced in 1975 as Cadillac's compact luxury car. Designed to compete with European imports and capture the attention of younger, more fuel-conscious buyers without sacrificing the prestige associated with the brand. Diesel engines were, at the time, widely perceived as economical and robust, particularly in Europe, where diesel-powered luxury cars and sedans were becoming popular. GM wanted to tap into that perception by offering an American-made diesel Cadillac, projected as a cutting-edge, fuel-efficient alternative in the luxury segment. The idea was not just to save fuel, but to position Cadillac as a forward-thinking brand that anticipated changing consumer demands. But the reality was a nightmare from the start. GM did not develop a new diesel engine for the Seville. Instead, it converted an Oldsmobile 350 cubic-inch gasoline V8 into a diesel. This shortcut, driven by the urgency to respond quickly to the energy crisis, resulted in a powertrain that was fundamentally mismatched to the vehicle and the market. Unlike purpose-built diesel engines engineered for diesel fuel's unique combustion properties, the converted Oldsmobile engine lacked robustness, refinement, and the engineering sophistication necessary to operate reliably over the long term. Power output was pitiful, approximately 105 horsepower and around 200 pound-feet of torque. Figures that were meager for a Cadillac-sized sedan, weighing well over 3,700 pounds. Drivers found acceleration lethargic and throttle response delayed, a particularly unwelcome trait for a luxury car where smoothness and effortless power delivery were key selling points. The engine's roughness was also a far cry from Cadillac's reputation for quiet, smooth V8 performance. What should have been a symbol of innovation instead felt like a cheap, underpowered compromise. Reliability issues compounded the disappointment. The Seville diesel's engine design was prone to cracked cylinder heads, blown head gaskets, leaking fuel injectors, and early engine failure. The engineering shortcuts meant that key components were under stress and not designed to handle the combustion pressures and heat unique to diesel operation. The infamous black smoke, a hallmark of incomplete combustion and excess fuel, was a constant presence, and the engine's harsh noise and vibration further eroded the luxury feel. Owners and dealers alike struggled with frequent breakdowns and expensive repairs, with many customers opting to replace the diesel engine entirely with a gasoline V8 to restore acceptable performance and reliability. The Seville diesel's failure was not just mechanical, but also cultural. In America, diesel engines had a reputation as noisy, rough, and truck-like, in contrast to the smooth, quiet gasoline engines that luxury car buyers expected. The Seville's diesel powertrain alienated its target demographic rather than attracting them. It contradicted the Cadillac brand image that emphasized refinement and prestige. In fact, the diesel version became a symbol of Cadillac's growing identity crisis during the decade, caught between clinging to old values and attempting to innovate under pressure from foreign competition and economic turmoil. From a marketing perspective, the Seville diesel was a disaster. Despite being heavily advertised as a revolutionary and fuel-saving option, consumer enthusiasm was tepid at best. The engine's poor performance, coupled with its rapid deterioration, led to a flood of warranty claims and recalls. The diesel option was dropped after just a few years, and the damage lingered for much longer. The Seville diesel's legacy is often cited as contributing to American consumers' mistrust of diesel-powered passenger cars, a stigma that persisted for decades and delayed the widespread acceptance of diesel in the U.S. market. Financially, the impact was significant too. The cost of warranty repairs, diminished resale values, and tarnished brand perception were setbacks for GM and Cadillac, which were already struggling with the challenges of downsizing, emissions regulations, and a shifting luxury car market.
The diesel Seville became a case study in what happens when rushed product development meets poor engineering judgment and misaligned brand strategy. Today, the 1976 Cadillac Seville diesel is remembered more as a cautionary tale than a collector's favorite. While the Seville line eventually recovered and evolved into a successful luxury model, the diesel episode remains a dark spot on Cadillac's otherwise illustrious history. Enthusiasts and historians often point to the diesel Seville as an example of how automakers attempt to rapidly innovate during crises can backfire spectacularly without adequate testing, investment, and understanding of the market. In summary, the 1976 Cadillac Seville diesel stands as a poignant reminder that luxury is about more than just fuel economy or being first with a new technology. It demands durability, refinement, and an emotional connection with buyers, qualities that this ill-conceived diesel Cadillac sorely lacked. Its legacy lives on as a lesson in automotive history about the perils of cutting corners, misjudging customer expectations, and the high stakes of innovation under pressure.
The 1979 Chrysler LeBaron Medallion represents one of the more telling examples of late 1970s American automotive industry struggles, where marketing hype frequently tried to mask underlying product shortcomings. As personal luxury cars soared in popularity, offering buyers a blend of comfort, style, and a sense of exclusivity, Chrysler sought to carve out a share of this expanding market without committing to the deep investment required to produce a truly luxurious or innovative model. Instead, the Medallion was largely a cosmetic retrofit, a base model LeBaron adorned with surface-level luxury cues, such as a vinyl roof, simulated wood paneling, and plush interior trim, hoping that these additions would fool consumers into perceiving it as a genuine upscale vehicle. On the surface, the Medallion styling attempted to evoke traditional luxury, with its padded vinyl roof stretching over the pillars and its characteristic faux wood grain that adorned the sides and interior trim, referencing a long-standing American taste for coach-built luxury cars. However, these were mostly vinyl and plastic appliques rather than real wood or leather craftsmanship, and while visually aiming for class, they often felt artificial and cheap, especially when the materials quickly aged and cracked and faded in sunlight or temperature swings. The vinyl roof, popular in the era for its upscale connotations, proved a double-edged sword. While enhancing the car's profile initially, it contributed to moisture retention around the edges, accelerating corrosion and compromising structural integrity over time. Underneath these aesthetic add-ons, the Medallion's mechanics were virtually unchanged from the standard LeBaron. Engine options, primarily modest inline six-cylinders or less powerful V8s, struggled to move the slightly heavier Medallion, which offered little improvement in acceleration or highway cruising compared to its less adorned siblings. The suspension and chassis were tuned toward comfort, but lacked any sportiness or road-hugging precision, resulting in a soft, floaty ride that could not compete with more modern or European luxury sedans. Furthermore, the fuel efficiency was underwhelming, particularly in an era when rising gas prices were making buyers more conscious of economy. Buyers who anticipated a refinement commensurate with the elevated price tag were often disappointed to find the driving experience still reminiscent of a mid-tier family sedan rather than a plush luxury cruiser. Interiors, while featuring extra padding and some upgraded upholstery materials, often betrayed the car's underlying cheapness. The simulated wood trims were prone to peeling and cracking, revealing the plastic beneath, while the vinyl upholstery could become sticky or cracked in the heat. Dashboard components and switches, often of questionable build quality, exhibited rattles and failures over time. These issues detracted sharply from the intended luxury feel and led many owners to regard the Medallion as little more than a dressed-up LeBaron rather than a true luxury vehicle. Unlike competitors from Cadillac, Lincoln, or even European brands which offered a more cohesive blend of performance, comfort, and status, the Medallion's package felt piecemeal, an afterthought meant to skim extra profit without truly elevating the driving or ownership experience. From a broader perspective, the Medallion encapsulates Chrysler's precarious position in the late 70s automotive landscape.
a company trying to maintain relevance amid tightening emissions and safety regulations, rising fuel prices, and an increasingly sophisticated consumer market. While Ford and General Motors invested in updating their luxury offerings or introducing new models, Chrysler's budget constraints and internal chaos forced it to rely on badge engineering and cosmetic tricks. This made the Medallion more of a marketing exercise than a product designed to earn lasting respect. Dealers found it challenging to convince discerning buyers that the added trim justified a higher price tag, especially when rival brands could offer genuinely superior performance, features, and build quality. In hindsight, the 1979 Chrysler LeBaron Medallion stands as a curious artifact of a transitional era, one in which the ideals of American luxury clashed with harsh economic realities and shifting consumer expectations. It's a car that tried to wear the cloak of prestige, but could never quite convince the market it was anything beyond a vinyl-roofed facelift. Though it's mostly forgotten today and seldom sought after by collectors, the Medallion serves as a subtle cautionary tale about how superficial enhancements cannot replace genuine innovation or quality. For enthusiasts and historians, it highlights the challenges Chrysler faced during a turbulent decade and the consequences of resting too heavily on appearances when true substance was desperately needed.
The 1982 Cadillac Simmeron is often cited as one of the most infamous examples of badge engineering gone wrong in automotive history, and for good reason. At a time when Cadillac was synonymous with luxury, prestige, and American automotive excellence, the Simmeron was a jarring departure from that legacy, essentially a rebadged Chevrolet Cavalier with a few superficial upgrades sold at nearly double the price. This attempt to offer an entry-level Cadillac to lure younger, more budget-conscious buyers ended up backfiring spectacularly, damaging Cadillac's brand identity and alienating its core clientele. Cadillac's leadership at the time faced immense pressure from General Motors' corporate bosses to produce a compact luxury car to compete with rising European imports like BMW and Mercedes-Benz, as well as domestic challengers in the burgeoning luxury compact segment. However, instead of investing in a ground-up, Cadillac-specific design with the craftsmanship and engineering and prestige that customers expected, GM executives took a shortcut. They took the Chevrolet Cavalier, a modest, economy-oriented front-wheel drive compact car built on GM's J platform, and slapped on a Cadillac grille, badges, some extra chrome trim, and a slightly upgraded interior, featuring leather seats and digital gauges. The end result was the Simmeron. Upon its release, the Simmeron looked painfully familiar to anyone who had seen a Cavalier, and that familiarity was its fatal flaw. The exterior styling was conservative but undistinguished, featuring plastic bumpers and unremarkable body panels that failed to differentiate it meaningfully from the far cheaper Cavalier. Inside, the Simmeron's interior felt dated and uninspiring. While it had leather upholstery and some wood trim accents, the cabin materials and overall build quality fell far short of what buyers expected from a Cadillac. The dashboard and controls were shared with lower-tier GM models, which made the car feel like a dressed-up economy car rather than a true luxury machine. Under the hood, the Simmeron was equally unremarkable. It offered a range of four-cylinder engines borrowed directly from the Cavalier, delivering mediocre power and performance that struggled to justify the high price tag. The ride and handling were tuned for comfort, but the overall driving experience felt uninspired and bland, especially when compared to the European rivals Cadillac hoped to compete against. The Simmeron lacked any real prestige or performance credentials, which further undermined its value proposition. The press and public response was swift and brutal. Critics derided the Simmeron as a cynical cash grab that insulted Cadillac's heritage.
It became a symbol of GM's complacency and cost-cutting, a car that not only failed to attract new luxury buyers, but also drove away loyal Cadillac customers who saw the brand's standards slipping. Cadillac's image as the pinnacle of American luxury was severely tarnished, and the damage lingered for years. The Simmeron's failure also had a ripple effect on GM's other divisions, fueling skepticism about badge engineering across the entire company. Sales of the Simmeron were disappointing from the start. Despite aggressive marketing, the car never gained traction with either luxury buyers or younger customers. It was widely viewed as overpriced and underwhelming, a fake Cadillac that didn't deserve the name. Production lasted only 5 years, from 1982 to 1987, and even then, the model was quietly phased out without fanfare. In retrospect, the Cadillac Simmeron serves as a textbook case of how not to design and market a luxury car. It exemplifies the dangers of cutting corners on engineering and design, relying too heavily on badge recognition, and underestimating the importance of brand identity and customer expectations. While badge engineering can sometimes succeed when executed with care and respect for the brand, the Simmeron was a blunt, clumsy attempt that almost destroyed Cadillac's reputation. It stands as a cautionary tale for automakers about the perils of trying to chase market trends without authentic substance. Despite its ignominious place in automotive history, the Simmeron's legacy is not just one of failure, but also a lesson that helped shape Cadillac's later resurgence. Recognizing the damage done, Cadillac eventually recommitted itself to genuine innovation, higher quality, and luxury craftsmanship, leading to the development of modern models that restored the brand's prestige. But for decades, the Simmeron remained a glaring example of lost opportunity, a luxury car that was little more than a dressed-up economy sedan, emblematic of a challenging era for American automakers.
The 1984 Dodge Rampage stands as one of the most curious and misunderstood vehicles in the American automotive landscape of the early 1980s. A strange experiment born out of necessity, ambition, and a rapidly changing market that few fully grasped at the time. Designed as a compact pickup truck, it was Dodge's attempt to capture a niche that seemed promising amid rising fuel prices and shifting consumer preferences towards smaller, more economical vehicles. However, the Rampage's hybrid nature, part car, part truck, made it difficult for traditional buyers to embrace, and it never quite fit into any established category. Rooted firmly in the Dodge Omni hatchback platform, the Rampage borrowed heavily from a front-wheel drive economy car to create what was essentially a coupe with its rear chopped off to accommodate a small pickup bed. This bed was modest in size, far smaller than conventional pickups, with shallow sides and limited payload capacity. The design was pragmatic, but lacked the robust, work-ready vibe that truck buyers expected. Instead of a sturdy body-on-frame chassis typical of pickups, the Rampage had a unibody construction, giving it a lighter feel and better fuel efficiency, but also less ruggedness and durability. The bed's dimensions and shallow depth made it ill-suited for hauling anything beyond light cargo or small loads, which further alienated buyers who might otherwise have considered a compact truck for utility. Styling-wise, the Rampage was an awkward middle child. From the front, it retained the sharp angular lines of the Dodge Omni, with simple rectangular headlights, a narrow grille, and an unassuming bumper, but the rear transition to a cargo bed was jarring. The overall proportions seemed off balance, and the truck's profile was a study in odd compromises. The rear fenders flared slightly to accommodate the cargo box, but the integration felt awkward, leaving many to see the Rampage as a hatchback missing its rear hatch, or a pickup that never fully embraced the rugged truck image. The interior was similarly utilitarian: basic seats, minimal trim, and a no-frills dashboard that emphasized function over style. Under the hood, the Rampage was powered by a small, fuel-efficient 2.2-liter inline-4 engine, producing modest horsepower and torque figures. This engine, while reliable and economical, lacked the grunt that truck drivers typically demanded, leaving the Rampage sluggish when fully loaded and incapable of towing anything substantial. The choice of front-wheel drive was a practical one for fuel economy and packaging, but felt counterintuitive for a vehicle intended to haul cargo. It gave the Rampage car-like handling and decent traction in slippery conditions, but it also limited its appeal among traditional pickup customers who prized ruggedness, rear or four-wheel drive, and towing capability. The Dodge Rampage was never intended to be a full-fledged workhorse or a performance vehicle. It was designed for light utility and economical transportation, targeting urban and suburban drivers who needed occasional cargo space but preferred the drivability and economy of a car. However, this messaging was difficult to communicate to the market. Pickup buyers generally dismissed it as too fragile and small, while car buyers saw it as an odd compromise that didn't fully satisfy either utility or comfort needs. Introduced in 1982 and discontinued by 1984, the Rampage's short production run reflected its commercial struggles. By then, Japanese automakers had already captured much of the compact truck market with well-built, reliable models like the Toyota pickup and Datsun, Nissan trucks, which offered better performance, more utility, and stronger reputations. In contrast, the Rampage's quirky design, limited capabilities, and awkward positioning left it stranded between market segments. Dodge's marketing efforts struggled to find a coherent narrative for the vehicle, and the Dover network was unsure how to sell it effectively. Despite its commercial failure, the Dodge Rampage has garnered a niche following among collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate its unique blend of economy car drivability with pickup utility, a rare and bold experiment in vehicle design. Its rarity, combined with its place as one of the few American front-wheel drive pickups, makes it a fascinating study in automotive history. Many Rampage owners fondly remember the car for its surprising maneuverability, decent gas mileage, and quirky charm, even if they acknowledge its limitations. One former owner described the Rampage as a practical city truck that didn't know what it wanted to be, too fragile for a truck, too strange for a car, but somehow endearing in its honesty. Another noted that it was the perfect commuter for small errands, but trying to haul anything serious was like asking a hatchback to do a pickup's job. The Rampage may have been short-lived, but it remains an intriguing symbol of the 1980s automotive industry struggles to adapt to changing consumer tastes, rising fuel economy standards, and a shifting economic landscape. In the grand tapestry of American vehicles, the Dodge Rampage occupies a curious corner, a bold experiment that didn't quite succeed commercially, but pushed boundaries and tried to redefine what a pickup truck could be. It stands as a reminder that innovation sometimes means taking risks that may not pay off immediately, but leave a lasting, if quirky, legacy. Today, the Rampage is an oddball collectible, a conversation starter, and a fascinating footnote in the story of how American automakers wrestled with the future of trucks and economy vehicles in a rapidly changing world.
The 1989 Chrysler TC by Maserati stands as one of the most notorious and misunderstood vehicles of the late 20th century, embodying a fascinating yet ultimately failed experiment in automotive collaboration between American industry and Italian craftsmanship. Born from an ambitious alliance between Chrysler Corporation and Maserati, the TC was intended to be a luxurious, exclusive roadster that would blend the flair and prestige of Italian automotive heritage with the mass production capabilities and affordability of American manufacturing. However, despite the lofty goals and the tantalizing promise of transatlantic elegance and performance, the end result was a perplexing vehicle that alienated enthusiasts and buyers alike, and today is remembered more as a cautionary tale than a triumph. The genesis of the TC project was rooted in Chrysler's desire, under Lee Iacocca's leadership, to tap into the lucrative luxury sports car market and to elevate the company's image by partnering with an iconic European brand. Maserati, a mark synonymous with high-performance Italian craftsmanship and racing pedigree, seemed a perfect partner. The idea was to create a two-seat convertible that could rival European roadsters from the likes of Porsche, BMW, and Jaguar, but be sold at a more accessible price point for American buyers seeking prestige and style without the prohibitive cost of a purebred Italian supercar.
Stylistically, the TC was designed with input from Maserati's design team, but was ultimately penned by Chrysler's in-house stylists, resulting in a vehicle that neither fully embraced Italian exoticism nor American boldness. The car's silhouette was elegant but restrained, sporting classic roadster proportions with a long hood, short deck, and a modest rake. Its lines were clean but conservative, lacking the flamboyance that typically defines a Maserati. The exterior details, such as the quad-round headlights, the slatted grille with the Maserati Trident emblem, and the distinctive tail lamps, hinted at luxury but felt somewhat muted and safe. The stainless steel badging and subtle Italian touches struggled to mask the underlying familiarity of the Chrysler platform, making the TC visually ambiguous, neither fully exotic nor completely conventional. Mechanically, the TC was underwhelming, much to the chagrin of performance purists. Rather than developing a bespoke powertrain or sourcing one from Maserati's racing-influenced lineup, Chrysler opted to equip the TC with a 2.2-liter turbocharged inline-4 engine, lifted from its K-Car platform. This engine, while competent for everyday driving, produced a mere 150 horsepower, an anemic figure for a car marketed as a luxury sports convertible. Its top speed hovered around 120 miles per hour, and acceleration was leisurely at best. The available transmissions included a 5-speed manual and a 3-speed automatic, but neither delivered the engaging driving experience expected from a car bearing the Maserati name. The suspension setup favored comfort over agility, with soft springs and tuned dampers, making the TC feel more like a cruiser than a sports car on twisty roads. Underneath its Italian-American badge engineering, the TC was essentially a dressed-up Chrysler LeBaron convertible. It shared the same platform, suspension components, and many interior elements with the LeBaron, a car known for its comfortable ride, but lackluster performance and rather plain interior. While the TC's interior received some upgrades, such as leather upholstery, wood trim accents, and a Maserati-branded steering wheel, the dashboard, instrument cluster, and center console were largely borrowed from Chrysler's existing parts bin. This mismatch was glaring, especially to buyers expecting the richness of Italian materials and craftsmanship. The build quality was inconsistent, and the fit and finish often reflected Chrysler's mass production constraints rather than the hand-built precision associated with Maserati. The TC's pricing was another major stumbling block. When it debuted, it carried a price tag upwards of $35,000, a hefty sum in the late 1980s, and one that placed it in direct competition with established European sports cars that offered genuine performance, superior engineering, and strong brand cachet. Buyers who might have been enticed by the Maserati badge were quickly put off by the car's underwhelming performance and lack of true exclusivity. The TC lacked the race-bred pedigree, the mechanical sophistication, and the visceral driving experience that aficionados expected from a Maserati. It felt more like a luxury cruiser with a fancy badge than an exotic sports car. Critics were quick to label the TC a classic example of badge engineering gone wrong. Automotive journalists of the time described it as a LeBaron in a tuxedo, a missed opportunity, and a car that promised more than it delivered. Owners often shared this sentiment, praising the car's styling and exclusivity, but lamenting its disappointing driving dynamics and lack of mechanical refinement. One owner recalled, "It looked the part, but when you pressed the accelerator, it was clear that the heart wasn't in it." Another said, "You'd expect a Maserati to roar and dance, but this one just ambled politely." Adding to the TC's woes was the timing of its release. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw increasing competition from German and Japanese luxury sports cars that offered better performance, reliability, and dealer support. Brands like BMW and Mercedes-Benz had established reputations for producing driver-focused convertibles with cutting-edge technology. Meanwhile, Maserati itself was struggling financially, limiting the ability to invest in proper development and marketing for the TC. The partnership, instead of being a symbiotic fusion of strengths, felt like a rushed and superficial collaboration, resulting in a product that belonged fully to neither company.
Production lasted only a few years, from 1989 to 1991, with approximately 7,300 units built, making it relatively rare but not truly exclusive. The limited numbers and its place as a unique Chrysler-Maserati hybrid have earned the TC a niche following among collectors interested in automotive oddities and badge-engineered curiosities. Today, the TC is often looked back on with a mix of bemusement and nostalgia, an emblem of late Cold War-era automotive experiments and the pitfalls of corporate collaborations lacking a clear vision. In hindsight, the 1989 Chrysler TC by Maserati is a fascinating study in contrasts. It embodies the allure of Italian design and luxury tempered by American practicality and corporate constraints. It aimed to be a symbol of international automotive cooperation and prestige, but instead became a lesson in how even two strong brands can falter when their collaboration lacks coherence and authentic purpose. The TC remains a curious footnote in both Chrysler's and Maserati's histories, a car that promised to unite worlds but ultimately united disappointment, leaving behind a legacy of style without substance and dreams that outpaced reality.
The 2002 Lincoln Blackwood is one of the most fascinating and unusual experiments in American automotive history, a luxury pickup truck that boldly tried to redefine what a truck could be, but ultimately became a textbook example of how not to blend utility and luxury. Lincoln, Ford's upscale brand, sought to carve out a new niche by creating a premium pickup that catered exclusively to affluent customers who wanted all the style and refinement of a luxury car combined with the distinctive presence and rugged image of a truck. Unfortunately, the Blackwood's combination of opulence and impracticality made it a commercial misfire that lasted just a single model year. At first glance, the Blackwood looked striking. It was based on the sturdy Ford F-150 Super Crew platform, but Lincoln's designers transformed the pickup into a lavish rolling statement. The exterior featured unique, tasteful styling cues, sleek body-colored bumpers, a signature Lincoln grille with chrome accents, and distinctive 18-inch polished aluminum wheels. The truck's stance was imposing, yet elegant, giving off an aura of prestige without looking overtly flashy or ostentatious. The Blackwood was unmistakably a Lincoln, with design touches that echoed the brand's flagship luxury sedans, but with the muscular proportions of a full-size pickup. The real twist came when you looked at the truck bed. Unlike any other pickup, the Blackwood's cargo area was fully lined with high-quality carpet, matching the plush carpeting found inside luxury homes, and was covered by a rigid, lockable tonneau cover finished in matching paint. Instead of a practical, open bed designed for hauling dirt, tools, or lumber, the Blackwood offered a secure, carpeted cargo vault intended for carrying golf clubs, expensive luggage, or other delicate items. The interior of the bed even featured LED lighting and power outlets for charging devices, emphasizing the focus on convenience and comfort over rugged functionality. Inside the cabin, the Blackwood continued its luxury mission with supple black leather seats, premium wood trim, and advanced, for the time, technologies such as a premium audio system and power-adjustable everything. The ride quality was smooth, thanks to a refined suspension setup and a powerful 5.4-liter Triton V8 producing around 300 horsepower paired with an automatic transmission. It was a truck that drove more like a luxury sedan than a workhorse, delivering comfort and refinement in spades. But therein lay the problem. The Blackwood's fundamental contradiction was that it was a pickup truck with almost none of the practicality that buyers expected from a truck. The carpet-lined bed was completely unsuitable for hauling anything messy or heavy, and the fixed tonneau cover prevented the use of standard pickup accessories like a camper shell or hauling tall items. The interior lighting of the bed was even lightning power outlets for charging devices, emphasizing the focus on convenience and comfort over rugged functionality. Sales were poor from the start. Customers didn't know what to make of a truck that couldn't really work as a truck, but demanded a price premium well above the regular F-150. Priced near $40,000, a significant jump from other pickups of the time, the Blackwood was seen as a niche vehicle with no clear purpose. Dealers reported that the truck attracted curious looks but few serious buyers, and Lincoln's marketing struggled to communicate the Blackwood's identity or benefits effectively. After just one model year, the decision was made to discontinue the model. Today, the Lincoln Blackwood is remembered as a bold, if misguided attempt to create a new market segment that never materialized. It's often cited alongside other ill-fated luxury trucks like the Cadillac Escalade XT and the Lincoln Mark LT as examples of how combining luxury and utility isn't always straightforward. Collectors and automotive historians view the Blackwood as a fascinating curiosity, a truck that redefined luxury pickup to the point of impracticality, serving as a reminder that sometimes innovation requires more than just glitz and high-end materials. It needs a clear understanding of what buyers actually want. In the end, the 2002 Lincoln Blackwood stands as a unique chapter in the story of American trucks, a vehicle that dared to dream big but failed to find its place, leaving behind a legacy of plush carpets and locked-down cargo spaces that no toolbox or lumber ever touched.